A warm welcome to our webinar, Recognising Micro-Credentials, Lessons from the World's Best. I'm Brendan O'Malley, Editor-in-Chief of University World News, and this is part of our ongoing webinar series with our partner ABET, the global non-profit quality assurance and accreditation organisation. The webinars explore issues of critical importance to higher education and society and combine high-level debate with practical guidance. The development of micro-credentials has been extraordinary and prolific in recent years. Among the reasons are the rising demand among employers and learners seeking skills for a rapidly evolving world of work, the development of massive online learning platforms, and of course the pandemic, which accelerated digital and short course learning. Today, recognition of micro-credentials is the new frontier as universities, employers, countries, and regions work to make micro-credentials matter. Today's panel comprises international experts who represent micro-credentials development and recognition at the global and regional levels. Their voices for academia and employers and quality assurance and micro-credentials recognition professionals. If you're watching this webinar as a replay on our YouTube channel, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more discussions like this one. Now, before we introduce our speakers, we'd like to begin with a short poll to get a sense of who is joining us today. This is the first of 4 polls, and you'll see in the interactions tab on the right what the questions are, and I'm going to read them to you. This is just to find out a bit about who you are, so please let us know whether you are a university leader, a senior academic, employer, manager or professional, university administrator, student, policymaker, or none of the above. If at any time during the discussion you have questions, please type them in the chat window. The webinar has been scheduled for 90 minutes. The panel session will wrap up in an hour, leaving plenty of time for your questions. Now, let me introduce you to our expert panelists. Welcome, Borhin, Dora, Simone, and Jessica, and thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Borhin Chakrun is Director of the Division for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO, an engineer with a PhD in Education Sciences from Bourgogne University. He previously worked at the European Training Foundation and has led policy reviews and global initiatives on skills development, TVET, and lifelong learning in the context of the SDGs. Dora Smith is Senior Director of Future Workforce Strategy at Siemens Digital Industries Software, where she leads Siemens' global future workforce and academic strategy, including partnerships with thousands of universities worldwide. Dora directs Siemens' academic and credentials initiatives and hosts the Innovation in the Classroom podcast. And Simone Ravaioli is Director of Global Academic Innovation at EdTech company Instructure, and a leading figure in digital credential ecosystems. He co-chairs the W3C Verifiable Credentials for Education Task Force and chairs the Credential Engine Advisory Group, helping to shape global standards for verifiable credentials and learning and employment. And last but certainly not least is Jessica Silwick, Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at ABET. With a background in accounting and non-profit leadership, she has helped guide ABET's expansion from traditional degree accreditation into new areas such as micro-credential recognition. Jessica serves on the board of directors of the Council of Engineering and Scientific Society Executives. Now let's have a look at the results of our poll. We can see that 10% are university leaders, 12% senior academics, 17% academics, 15% employer, manager or professional, 20% university administrators, no students so far, and 5% policymakers, and 20% are none of the above. Now, the webinar will take the form of questions to our three panelists in an interview format. Please could each of you speak briefly about your current work, as well as responding to the questions I'm about to ask you. First, let's look at the global trends. Borhin, from UNESCO's global vantage point, what policy and system forces are driving the rapid rise of micro-credential? And why is recognition now a critical imperative?
Well, thank you, Brendan, and very good afternoon to you. Good morning, good evening, wherever our participants are placed. And it's a pleasure to be with you today and to share a perspective regarding the international movement around micro-credentials. Brendan, you already set the scene about why it is important for us to discuss micro-credentials today, and I would like to take this global perspective and articulate or say the dynamic around micro-credentials around three areas or three blocks. The first one, I would like to take a sustainability agenda and related to SDGs and SDG 4 in particular. In reality, micro-credentials are a way for us to advance flexible learning opportunities, to have a learner-centered approach, and to link education and training and higher education with the other sustainable development agenda, and to take a right-based perspective that the UNESCO and the UN has been advancing. So I think taking that right-based perspective and lifelong learning perspective and SDGs is an important vector looking at the role of micro-credentials and how it can support more learner-centered approach. The second cluster of factors are related to some of the factors that you mentioned, be it demographic challenges in some contexts and youth bulge in others, be it the changes in the labor market and the dynamic of mismatch in some contexts, or more, I would say, surplus of workforce that is coming to the labor market, and a mismatch between the demand for skills and what individuals are getting in terms of skills acquisition and entering the labor market. And we know that with different data and different predictions that everybody almost will need to upgrade and update our skills, and this is something that will need much more agile, much more flexible learning opportunities. And again, micro-credentials are offering those opportunities for much more personalized and more flexible learning pathways. The last cluster is more political. If I take, of course, UNESCO, through the work we are doing on the recognition of qualifications, we are advancing this more flexible learning and pathways, and also certification and assessment and recognition. The last G20 meeting under the South African presidency has advanced also micro-credentials are a way for recognizing qualification and skills across border, the European Commission agenda, and other regional economic agenda. So there is a political also support and a narrative around the importance of micro-credentials in the context of responding to the challenges that the world is facing, be it learning, be it mismatch with the skills demand, be it also the need for everybody to acquire new skills. So this is a first perspective as I can see it from a global observatory that we are having. Over to you.
Thank you, Borhin. And next we go to Dora. Dora, from a major international employer's perspective, what are the current trends that are making micro-credentials attractive, and why now?
Yeah, great question, Brendan. And hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today and to have this discussion with you. You know, from a Siemens perspective, micro-credentials have really become this essential, and it's not unique to Siemens, I think it's to any employer today, this essential currency in what has become the skills economy. And the most compelling trend is really not new, but it is this ongoing urgent need to bridge that widening gap. And I think Borhin said it well, right? This mismatch between academic prep and the dynamic, evolving, changing demands of industry. So while the trend is not new there, the trends that have changed really are in the demand and supply side of the house. And Brendan, I like your words about, you know, micro-credentials. That's really what's changing now, because we are at this timely intersect where companies, they're shifting to rapidly skills-based hiring, and academia is increasingly to integrate these industry and third-party validated credentials. And that is new. I've watched the stats on both sides of the house for the last few years, and it has really made a seismic shift in the last two. And so we need micro-credentials because they act as really a universal translator, if you will, making skills immediately recognizable and valuable across both those worlds, both academic and industry. And then, we all know and can see this pace of digital transformation, it's not changing, but it means that our traditional, maybe longer form cycles of education simply can't keep up. And that's where they need the help of these industry credentials. So micro-credentials really offer that agility so that we can all really rapidly develop and validate the very precise skills we need now, right? The need for these evolving jobs. And so they really bring that hope to us that they can assure that the future workforce stays ahead and not behind.
So do you see it as a way of higher education becoming much more responsive to industry's needs?
It gives them a real path forward to really evolve more quickly and change their engineering curriculum. In the past, it was difficult, but now I think they see industry coming in to help in the form of these micro-credentials and bringing that subject matter expertise to them that will help them evolve more quickly.
Thank you. Simone, digital trust is central to recognition. What, in your view and great experience in this area, are the most important interoperability and data standard decisions that universities and employers must take right now if their micro-credentials are to be portable into the future? We can't hear you, Simone.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can now. Great.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think we're really facing a set of three decisions, and they're all about common data language. The first one would have to be to choose a language that relies on open linked data models. That is creating the opportunity of credentials making sense. Credentials that are not based on open models are just souvenirs. So that's kind of the first big decision, and that speaks really to the meaning-making layer of credentials, the expressiveness, the content that they carry. The second decision would have to be about anchoring these credentials into existing frameworks. This is where we can help the comparability of these credentials. The frameworks are of different nature. We start with qualification frameworks, but competence frameworks are also increasingly where we're seeing the opportunities to make these credentials understandable and transparent, and therefore portable. And the third one would have to be around designing verifiability from the get-go. That means that verification becomes a sort of new accreditations. That means that we now can trust when a credential is presented to us, because the ecosystem and the digital infrastructure, the digital trust infrastructure underneath it, ensures that recognition is a relatively low friction decision, and it doesn't end up being a research project, if you will. So I think those are the three main decisions that we're facing.
Thank you, Simone. Jessica, we've heard of the importance of verification, and this is exactly where ABET comes in. What prompted ABET to step into micro-credential recognition now, and what gaps in the global quality assurance landscape might you be responding to?
Yeah, so we have been watching the micro-credential space for about 10 years now, honestly, watching it when it first took off and then since kind of monitoring the growth of it. And ABET is a quality assurance agency with a specific focus on STEM learning opportunities, whether that's through the accreditation of our specific STEM programs, and now through the recognition of credentials. We're here to serve the people and society as a whole. We've really started to take it very serious and invest in research and development about 6 years ago when we had one of our industry advisory council members approach us and say, ABET, we need you out there now. We're hiring individuals that we would have traditionally hired from 2 or 4 year degree programs who only have these credential learning, very skill set based credentials. So we, okay, so let's take this seriously. Let's start our research and development. So about 4 years ago, ABET stepped into the micro-credential recognition because the market finally hit a tipping point where choice has outpaced trust. So over the past decade, we've watched an explosion of micro-credentials, certificates, and non-degreed pathways in STEM, as I said, that was driven by upskilling, reskilling, workforce shortages, but with very uneven quality signals. So it's just as recently as about a month ago, our leadership said publicly that our recognition of credential service began over a decade ago when we saw rapid growth in this area. We made sure that we were ready to deliver this service as soon as we were done doing our research and development in a pivotal time when we believe it was necessary. Some of the gaps that we saw in the global quality assurance landscape that we are responding to is fragmented or missing standards. There really is an absence of, most countries and regions either have no dedicated quality assurance standards for micro-credentials, or they're still being piloted or just recently launched. So we saw a need within society to be able to offer this sort of quality assurance so that learners, employers, and teachers alike could feel confident in credentials that had ABET's seal of approval on them. We also saw weak transparency and truth in advertising, to tell you the truth. And we wanted to be able to go in and say, if something is ABET recognized, you can rest assured that we tested that they are delivering their stated promises to learners. We also saw limited external review beyond the issuing institution. So there was a lack of a third-party independent mechanism as well, where there were some quality assurance standards in place, and an unclear link to workforce and qualification frameworks, and the portability and recognition across borders and sectors. So we felt like ABET coming in and being able to provide this service globally would be able to address the unclear link to workforce and qualification frameworks, because we are going in and we are providing quality assurance at a very specific skill set level. So we go in and provide our quality assurance at the credential level, not the offer level or the institution level, but at a level to where we say this very specific credential with these very specific set skills, we have gone in and validated that for quality.
Thank you, Jessica. Now let's move on to our second poll. And the questions for that are not appearing on my screen, but I'll read them to you. What best describes your organization's current engagement with micro-credentials? 1, we offer and recognize, and when I say your organization, if you're an academic, I mean your university or institution. 1, we offer and recognize micro-credentials. 2, we offer but do not formally recognize micro-credentials. 3, we recognize external micro-credentials only. 4, we are exploring but not yet active. Or 5, no current plans or unsure. Right, let's turn for a while to the quite complex questions around equity and mobility, quality, trust, and transparency, evidence, and credibility. Quite a lot, actually, in the micro-credentials sphere. Borhin, in education, recognition is strongly linked to opportunity and to learner mobility. How can countries and universities ensure that recognition frameworks enhance equity, inclusion, and cross-border mobility?
Oh, thank you, Brandon. I would like to build on what Jessica finished with to come to your question. But I think first we need to be aware that micro-credentials are coming into a landscape that is already crowded and difficult to understand. We speak about micro-credentials, but we're speaking also about skills passport. We speak about learner records. We speak about traditional qualifications or macro qualifications. So I think that makes the landscape really very difficult to understand. And taking the point I mentioned earlier, taking a learner-centered approach, this makes life very complicated for people who have difficulties already in understanding the qualification systems and understanding how they can leverage the potential for engaging in lifelong learning. We know from our international data that less than 5% of low-skilled workers are engaged in lifelong learning opportunities. We know that we have 20% of youth are in need situation, not in education, training, or in employment. So there is a challenge already, given the complexity of the landscape, given the complexity of understanding what's the value of a micro-credential, both in terms of learning opportunity, but also in terms of labor market outcomes. And that impacts particularly people who are the furthest from learning opportunities. And the challenge for us as an international community is that micro-credentials will go to the people who are already benefiting from learning opportunities and who are benefiting from what is offered to them. So our actions should be around three areas that I think are important. One is about the quality assurance, is about the transparency, is about information that is giving about micro-credentials and place them within that broader qualification system. Second is to offer more information, career guidance and counseling for individuals who have difficulties to engage in lifelong learning. And some countries have established interesting mechanisms like the learning accounts in France and in Singapore, or learning opportunities in Australia, and even in a country like Morocco, where there is a grant for young people and adults to engage in lifelong learning. So we need those mechanisms that can reinforce lifelong learning and can leverage the micro-credentials. Second and third, and I think it's important, is about data and evidence. We have a lot of reports, including from UNESCO, but with other organizations, about the offer. Less so on the outcomes, less so on what we know about the outcome of learning and micro-credentials. And that's an effort that we need to do, having common definitions, agreeing on some common principles on quality assurance, and making this accessible to countries and labor market. I would like, in a very quick, just to share data from the survey we have conducted with the South Africa presidency of the G20. And when we look at the challenges as expressed by the countries, we see lack of standardization and quality assurance mechanism. 15 countries out of 20 are highlighting this challenge. Determining the value or equivalency of micro-credentials, 14 out of 20 countries are referring to it. Ensuring the credibility and authenticity of micro-credentials, 12 countries are referring to that. Insufficient awareness or understanding among beneficiaries. And last but not least is the capacity of the stakeholders to engage in building, designing appropriate and relevant quality micro-credentials. So these are challenges that we need to face to address the equity and inclusion challenges as we see it, and as I was referring to it earlier. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Borhin. Now, Dora, two questions for you. First, please share with us an employer's perspective on micro-credentials and tell us about Siemens' credential strategy, why you are leaning into micro-credentials, and how do you address and or ensure the quality of learning?
Yeah, you know, from an employer's lens, we really do see micro-credentials as game changers. They provide, you know, this clear, verifiable in terms of specific skills. And we think they're really crucial for building the robust talent pipeline that we need, and ensuring that we have, and not just we as Siemens, but also our customers and our partners, have the right capabilities so that we can, you know, keep innovating and growing. And I'll repeat a word I said earlier, like they're about precision in talent development. And so we're leaning into micro-credentials is really on-ramps and off-ramps to new education and career pathways. And I think I saw in the chat a question about, you know, what's our perspective on credit versus non-credit. The very first micro-credential we launched that got ABET recognition was around circular economy with University of Colorado Boulder, and it's available on Coursera for everyone around the world. But worked really strategically with them because they wanted to make sure they were offering a credit option for that as well. So that's really important. But our overall strategy is really about how do we proactively shape the future of work by addressing what's been a decade-long challenge for both the quantity and quality of engineering education graduates. And so, Jessica touched on really, choice may be way and trust, and this is why ensuring quality is really important. Siemens has a long history of very strong apprenticeship programs and professional education, but achieving formal recognition of quality assurance for micro-credentials, it was new for us as it was new for ABET. And so required developing, engaging offerings, but that also had robust auditable quality processes. So, we focused really on high quality, learner-centered experiences, and really expanded our approach to, content and technology delivery. At the end of the day, we're a tech company, and looking where we could leverage AI in the process to, elevate the engagement and make technical content more understandable. So for us, quality is really, it's about how do we embed X from the beginning and throughout, right? From ideation to design and delivery. Really, our credentials are not just effective, but they're globally recognized for that rigor. And we'll talk more about our partnership to ABET, but I think it speaks to that. But beyond ABET, we're really excited by the recognition and what was actionable adoption from this ecosystem of employers we interact with, right? So, but we have customers, we have both, academic and commercial partners, and now we're going to see major universities, because of that interest in integrating industry credentials, looking at what they see as a unique combo, digital mindset and digital skill set preparation, and then major manufacturing companies, and these are both big and small. I think I saw in the chat a comment about, we want to make sure they aren't controlled by a few big actors. How do we make sure this is addresses all? And so we really care a lot about both SMBs and large enterprise. And they're starting to integrate these micro-credentials into their learning and development programs, and then working with their universities that they're from to do the same so they can drive longer term impact. So maybe long answer to the two questions, Brenda, but hopefully that gives you some context for where we're focused and what we're passionate about.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Simone, over to you. What evidence and metadata and verification features must a recognized micro-credential provide in order to be instantly understood and trusted? For instance, to be trusted by an employer for a hiring decision. We can't hear you.
Apologies.
Right.
So it's about understanding and trust. And when it comes to understanding, I want to make sure that there is an understanding or a decoupling of the meaning of digital credentials and micro-credentials. I think there is often conflation between the two. And so in ACRO, the Association of College Registrar and Admission Officer in the US, provided a very easy streetwise definition that I'd like to use. And essentially, ACRO says that a badge, an open badge, is to a micro-credentials as to the diploma is to the degree. So a digital credential is a token of recognition of learning that you get at the end of a learning experience. Whereas the micro-credential is the whole thing. It's a design, it's a delivery, it's the assessment, and the recognition of a learning experience. In this case, typically short, sharp, and skills-based when we talk about micro-credentials. All right, I think that's important because there is a digital transformation of credentialing in process, but often in our conversations, we use one for the other. That said, the trust question, it's probably broken down into main questions that employer might have. One is, can I trust the signal? And the other is, does it have useful information for me? How strong is that signal? In the digital credential space, a good metaphor I think that we can use to appreciate trust is provided by a letter. So imagine a letter that has an envelope inside and that has a seal on top, like on the outside. So the envelope is really where you solve the issues around, can I trust the signal? So that's where the identity, the provenance, to some extent, the integrity of the message comes through. Has it been tampered with? Does it come from a known issuer? So that is the role of the envelope. Clearly, the seal, it is a cryptographic signatures that makes sure that we know that the content is untouched. But it's really like inside the envelope, in the letter, where we get the signal, where we want to be able to understand the information that it carries. And this is often related to the individual data elements, the information points, the skills that it contains, the alignments to qualification frameworks. And to some extent, and possibly more powerfully, the evidence that comes with it. So digital credentials now allow for evidence, artifacts of learning to be attached to a digital credentials and to be transferred around. In a sense, evidence adds signaling power. It goes beyond any alignments, but it just shows you what someone's got. This is very powerful. If we think of skills as currency, as Dora I think was saying, adding evidence adds liquidity to that currency, makes it much more portable. And additionally to evidence, the technology that we have available today, credentialing tech, really allows for mechanisms of endorsement. So now we can speak into that liquidity. Once a learner shares a credentials on the web or circulates it around, there is an interesting effect that we can derive from the praises, the likes, the upvotes, and the endorsements that credentials gets once it's out in the wild. Now that again adds liquidity. It makes that claim verifiable as it was more current, therefore adding signaling power to it.
Thank you, Simone. So there we heard a lot about the importance of evidence. Jessica, regarding evidence for credibility and quality and based on ABET's recognition model, what type of assessment evidence, curriculum documentation and outcome verification must issuers prepare to demonstrate true quality? Perhaps briefly take us through your micro-credentials recognition process.
Yes, happy to do so. Our process starts with an application. So we have an online application, which is currently open. You can go to the ABET website and find it. We make offers complete the application, again, because of the variety and diversity of offers that are out there. Our experience is that we're still learning about this ecosystem and the vast differences between the credentials themselves as well as the providers. So we make providers submit an application so that we can do a preliminary analysis to make sure that they have a high-level structure in place that will even allow them to be able to begin the process of showing that they are able to meet our quality standards. So once an application is submitted, it is reviewed, and then if it's reviewed and accepted, an offer would move on to the next stage in the process, which would be submitting a self-assessment report. And this is not to be confused with ABET self-study report for those of you who are familiar with accreditation. It is by no means as rigorous or requires as much information. It is a fillable form where we ask very specific questions about your credentials. And then that form is delivered to a team of expert credential evaluators who will use your assessment form to begin the stage of a virtual review. And they will be applying our credential recognition standards against what you've submitted in your self-assessment, as well as other documentation and information that will be provided by the offers. Since there's a lot of flexibility, as with ABET accreditation, we don't tell offers how to create or deliver their credential offering. So every provider will probably give us something different as far as evidence goes to showing their compliance with our standards. So it's probably easier to address your question to go through a high level of what our standards are. So every offer must show evidence that they are in compliance with our standards, and we have a total of 6 of those. The first one is administrative. So at a very high level, we're going to look at things like learner life cycle. What resources do you have? How do you keep your records? We're going to look at, do you validate subcontractors that you use? And is there appropriate use of support products? And that's just to name a few. The second standard is we want to see that you have credential educational goals. So what are your learners being prepared to do? How do you communicate that? How do you advertise that to them? So we're looking to see that you have stated credential education goals and that you're sharing those in a very transparent and honest way. So we're going to look for evidence that you're going to provide to us to show compliance with that. The third one would be learner outcomes. So what your learners must know and be able to demonstrate before being awarded the credential. So absolutely no credential will be recognized by ABET unless there is some sort of a check for understanding or a test to show that the knowledge that you are delivering is actually being transferred and obtained by the earners of your credential. So again, we want to make sure that you know that your earners have gained the skill sets or knowledge before you're awarding them with that credential. We're also looking at content creation and delivery, and that's got to be structured so that learners can achieve both the credential educational goals and learner outcomes that I just stated. So there'll be processes in place that our evaluators will conduct to be able to validate that based on whatever evidence is given. Number 5, it would not be ABET if there wasn't some factor of continuous quality improvement that we demand from anyone who receives our quality assurance seal of approval. So we want to know, do you have a continuous quality improvement system? Is it documented? How are you collecting data? How are you then using that data and using it to make improvements to your credential offering? And we want to see this as a continuous cycle with no beginning, no end. It's just part of how you manage your credential. And then the last one is credential policies and procedures. So we want to see that there's precise and consistent use of your credential name and all of your published materials. And then obviously other policies that there's consistency in them. And that you're using them and implementing them. So as I said before, these are our standards, and every provider of a credential will probably give us different evidence to show that they are in compliance with each one of our standards.
Thank you, Jessica. Interesting to see the meat of how these things are approached. And now we're going to go and have a look at the results of our second poll. Where we ask which best describes your organization's current engagement with micro-credentials, and 26% said they do offer and recognize micro-credentials. 21% they offer but do not formally recognize micro-credentials. Only 1% said they recognize external micro-credentials only, and 40% said they're exploring but not active, and 12% are unsure, which paints quite an interesting picture. It shows that we're still in the early days as far as universities are concerned, and there's a lot to work on. So now for our third poll question, which is, what is the main barrier to your organization or institution? What is the main barrier that your organization or institution faces in recognizing micro-credentials? Is it 1, lack of national or international frameworks? 2, quality assurance or credibility concerns? 3, systems and administrative complexity? 4, low staff capacity or skills? And 5, limited demand or unclear value. Right, so while you're answering that, we'll move on to the third set of questions, among which the recognition of micro-credentials will again feature, following on from Jessica's description of the ABET process. Borhin, UNESCO supports the recognition of micro-credentials by defining them, developing policy and quality assurance frameworks, and helping countries to work towards mutual credential recognition and lifelong learning. So what practical steps could universities and organizations take now to align their micro-credentials with national and regional qualifications frameworks so that learners can stack and transfer them?
Well, thank you, Brendan. I think there are a few areas of consideration that universities and tertiary education and in a way lifelong learning institutions have to take. One is aligning with the definition that are coming, and we, as UNESCO, we have defined it. We have given a definition of micro-credentials a few years ago, which is placed within the lifelong learning perspective that, of course, it bears quality assurance mechanism and procedure, but is also recognizing partial and validation of prior learning. So aligning, I think, themselves with those broad principles of the definitions and quality assurance dimensions seems to me one action that universities have to take and have to, and tertiary education has to consider. The second point, which is very important, is related to your previous question, is what's the purpose? Why we are designing and implementing micro-credentials? Some of them are related to what Dora was referring to, is how I can respond to the demand from the labor market, what are the needs, and how this will help my students and the learners in valuing and making the micro-credentials valorized in the labor market, bringing socioeconomic returns. Social, this could be participation in societies and communities. It can be gender equality, it can be equity for disadvantaged groups, but also economic in terms of labor market returns, then better salaries, better career development, and eventually better economic and growth in the economy, in the sector, and the nation as a whole. So I think that alignment also with the needs is very important. And third, I think it's about the societal role of universities. Universities are also to serve their community, to serve their ecosystem, and aligning their agenda with that demand, with the societal demand, is very important. And that's the question about, I would say, the purpose of micro-credentials and why we are designing them. Is it an education purpose? How we are serving a disadvantaged group? How we are designing a new curricula that meets the Sustainable Development Agenda? Do we want to develop programs and curricula that are harming the climate, for example? Do we want to develop curricula that are not respecting ethical use of artificial intelligence, for example? Do we want to develop programs that are not respectful of the academic freedom and the ethical, I would say, role of academia? So I think we need also to think about the purpose of it. And last but not least, I think something that we didn't discuss until now is very important. Micro-credentials can be standalone learning outcomes that maybe will not support lifelong learning progress and flourishing of individuals or of communities. If they are not stackable, for example, or if they are not necessarily building that professional identity. And we tend to neglect that we have professions, that the labor market is not only separated and fragmented set of skills. It's about identity, it's about building a career, it's about progressing in the labor market, in the world of work. And the question is, are micro-credentials supporting that? And I think these are fundamental questions that we are asking as an international community. We are setting them as an agenda for the global convention discussion on micro-credentials and for our work in terms of policy analysis and what is taking place in different contexts. I think these are important aspects also that we need to consider. Over to you.
Thank you, Borhin. You raised some very interesting questions there, and we see the great enthusiasm for micro-credentials and demand coming initially from industry, but there will be wider demand also as higher education has to work out how it should adapt to the future and its role in lifelong learning. And we're just beginning to touch on that. But Dora, please tell us, that's getting back to more on the industry side of things. Dora, please tell us about the Siemens partnership with ABET that led to achieving some of the first ABET recognized industry credentials recently. Though designed to be far quicker than program accreditation, we know it was by no means a simple process.
Yeah, it's been a rewarding journey, but it was a pioneering one as well, right? It was first for ABET and recognized credential program. It was first for an industrial, company to achieve formal academic grade quality assurance. But this partnership, I think it proved that industry innovation could meet and even elevate academic rigor for micro-credential recognition. And I think that gets at some of what Borny was talked about and some of the challenges there. I do think this creates a path forward. It was by no means simple, but achieving ABET recognition, I think for us was really a powerful catalyst in our own internal development and evolution, right? We transformed our processes as well to ensure that every aspect from curriculum design to assessment to, very importantly, continuous improvement, that it could meet those high standards. So it was an investment for us really in that capability. For example, we developed a really rigorous cadence of internal evaluation. So we did a lot of workshopping over the last 2 years for this. We gathered extensive feedback from academic industry stakeholders. And then, we did a pilot, so we used and learned from the learner feedback to enhance what's been a newer micro-credential we just launched called Expedite Skills for Industry. So really being, focused on, the content, the learning experience and the assessment, but really importantly, that ongoing continuous feed process. I really believe that voice of the learner was critical. And I think it gets to what Simone was addressing about, the evidence that you see, really the digital data that we'll have going forward to learn from how people are learning, right? These are signals for us, right? And they really can drive change and continuous improvement. We do see that there continues to be this increasing number of credentials available to learners, right? There's so many available. And so how does, an HR organization vet the quality for those? And so really with ABET, I think there's a path forward there that industry, human resources, people and organization can, along with academic, can trust that the credential is built on quality. Our own HR has looked at what we've done and now see this as a verified pipeline of talents that have the specific skills. They're really viewing it, and I'm proud for them to say this, that this is a powerful asset in their talent acquisition strategy. But ultimately, this partnership, it taught us that true quality, it isn't just in the what, right? Not in what we teach alone. It has to be in how we assure it. And so it's really allowed us to put a focus and embed excellence in what we're delivering. And I think it set a new for industry recognized credentials. And I'm within Siemens. We're a very large organization. I'm in one business unit. It's given us a leadership role within Siemens to try to drive recognized credential excellence across the board. So yes, very interesting times that we've learned a lot from.
Thank you, Dora. Yeah, Simone, with so many micro-credential formats and platforms emerging, how can institutions and organizations design micro-credentials that avoid dead ends where learners earn credentials that cannot be recognized, transferred, or used for future study, and that are compatible with evolving credential ecosystems?
Yeah, I love the question. I think the no dead ends should be the most important design principle that we can borrow from the transport industry, particularly because it speaks to mobility. In my day job at Instructure, but across my professional experience, mobility has really been, learner mobility, workers mobility has really been the one challenge that we've been trying to address. And in fact, we feel that our mission is to turn credentials into opportunities, and it is that into opportunities piece that really speaks to, I think, quality and maybe more importantly, value. And I do think that there is, in the ecosystem, there is a different framing of quality if you speak to academia or to employers. We are familiar with quality assurance frameworks, and yet I think in academia, let's say, and I think quality, quality is defined like in a context where it is at rest. So it's documenting it. But it's when credentials start to move around that value kicks in. So quality at rest is what academia knows, but what the world of work knows is value in motion. So really making sure that the ecosystem is fluid and is supporting the opportunity for skills to move around. Actually, I don't think that maybe in a few years we'll stop asking, where someone has studied, but we'll start asking more how far their skills can travel. So I really think connecting, systems, whether they are learning management system, credentialing platform, or HR management system, is certainly one of the challenges that we work on every day. And I mentioned the need to use standards to transport these credentials in a verifiable way, but more importantly, to provide an expressive way of understanding what they mean. So whether it is the skills definition aligned to existing frameworks, whether it is the endorsement that they carry, whether it is the accreditation of the issuing organization. Those are all key components that really help this ecosystem stick together and turn that quality, the quality we speak to, into value, in a sense. And lastly, I kind of wanted to offer a design move that I think, again, is not perceived in the same way when you look at academia or the world of work. We often talk about stackability, and what I refer to it as we should not design micro-credentials that are just one-off. They should always be part of a pathway, or they should be in a context. But stackability is one of those principles that, again, if you look at it from academia, stackability often refers to the ability of micro-credentials to have credits and to stack up to a full degree. Whereas if you ask employers, stackability or the value of a micro-credentials is often perceived as stacking on top of a degree. So there's no question around the degrees going away. But I think it's different perspectives that sustain the same principle of stackability that is one of the unique features of micro-credentials. But it's slightly offset, depending on what is the lens that you look at it from. So keeping this in mind, this is not a tension that I feel should be resolved. It's one of those tensions that we should be aware of. And in a sense, if we want this ecosystem to be resilient, we should not try to resolve it in one way or another, but we should learn how to live with it, in a sense, and recognize that both perspectives exist and they're both part of building this ecosystem.
Interesting. Thank you, Simone. Jessica, as Dora outlined, ABET recently completed its first recognition of an industry micro-credential. What were the most important lessons or surprises for both ABET and the credential partner, and the most important achievements, and what does this mean for the future?
Yeah, so ABET, we did conduct a series of 2 different pilots, and each pilot contained participants from both academia, industry, as well as a professional society. And we learned a lot through that experience. We realized that our first set of processes and standards would not work in this very fluid, very rapidly evolving landscape of credentials. So from our first pilot, we had to collect what we learned, go back to the drawing board, and create something that could be a little more fluid, a little more dynamic to keep up with the pace of micro-credentials. So then we developed our second set of standards and our second set of procedures. And that is the pilot which we invited Siemens to participate with us, as well as Purdue University Online and the American Society of Civil Engineers. Partnering with Siemens to pilot the second set of standards was extremely, extremely important and beneficial for us. ABET has a long history of collaborating with industry and receiving, feedback on the industry needs and, looking at the future and how education can be responsive. But this was the first time that we actually worked directly with an industry partner to pilot our quality assurance mechanism directly. What we found out was that we had a really good start, and our second set of standards and processes were, like I said, a very good start. But working with Siemens, we were able to identify areas almost immediately to where we could tweak our standards to make them a little bit more relevant, to make sure that we are capturing all of the necessary quality staples that should be present in a industry credential that whether they're partnering with academia or creating it on their own. So it was a very, very valuable experience for us. What we realized is that we're going to continue to learn. And this isn't going to be, there's no start or end for us when it comes to credentials. ABET is ready and poised to continue to evolve along with this landscape. We think that our processes are nimble enough. We are offering it. At first, we were only going to offer it twice a year. After working with Siemens, we were like, no, we need to offer this 4 times a year. So 4 times a year, a credential provider can apply to be evaluated. It is a total of about a 4-month process from beginning to end of when you apply to when you find out that you are recognized as a quality provider. Again, this is because of how quickly these things change, how quickly they want to launch them. The need for society for these particular skill sets could be immediate, and we need to be able to respond. It's 100% virtual. There's no travel involved, which again is another difference between our accreditation process that many are familiar with. We provide a mechanism throughout the 3, and there's only a 3-year recognition. So when you are recognized, it lasts for 3 years, again, because we recognize that these things are going to change and evolve rapidly. And as well as working with Siemens, we realized we need to have a mechanism in place as well for our credential providers to have constant access to us and keep the communication line open. So as they need to make major changes within their credential, there's a mechanism for them to be able to communicate to us, and that we can respond appropriately to ensure that the changes are not going to impact the quality.
Thank you, Jessica. So now we have the results of our third poll, which I'm just trying to find. Not appearing on my screen. So here we go. Sorry. Poll 3. So, what is the main barrier your organization faces in recognizing micro-credentials? 37% said lack of national or international frameworks. 20% said quality assurance or credibility concerns. 22% said systems administrative complexity. 8% said low staff capacity or skills. And 13% said limited demand or unclear value. So quite a strong need for national, international frameworks and many quality assurance or quality credibility concerns. So now for our final poll question, which is what should be high priorities for improving micro-credentials recognition? Select as many options as you like out of the 6, and those 6 are: 1, clear institutional organizational policy and criteria; 2, external and or international recognition partnerships; 3, stronger higher education and industry or employer alignment; 4, adoption of global quality standards; 5, better learner guidance and support, or 6, other. So now we are heading into the last question for our experts. Audience members, please do think of questions or comments and write them in the chat section. I see that some of you have already. Now, looking to the future, I'd like to ask a final question to all 4 panelists. What actions might universities, employers, organizations, countries, or regions take in the coming year to ensure that their micro-credentials achieve value, recognition, and learner and employer trust over the next decade? And or please offer a final insight into where micro-credentials are heading. And we'll start with Borhin.
Thank you, Brendan. I would like to make my last intervention around 2 aspects. One, what we are offering as UNESCO, and second, how I see the challenges or the opportunities going forward. Regarding what UNESCO is offering, first of all, today we have more than 100 countries that have ratified a regional or global convention. And those conventions are advancing better recognition of learning outcomes, partial studies, micro-credentials, although the term is not used as such, but we have an agenda of working on that. The second, and that's about multilateralism and way ensuring that we have a common understanding, common definitions, common principles of quality assurance across the board. The second, we have a network of information centers that are critical in better understanding and better engaging internationally. We have the ANIC-NARIC network, we have the CINALC, we have the APNIC, CINALC in Latin America, APNIC in Asia Pacific, we have the ANIS in Africa. So that network of information centers can play a critical role in better understanding micro-credentials, ensuring better recognition of micro-credentials, and fair and transparent recognitions of those qualifications. And the third aspect that we are offering is, of course, all the work that we are doing in terms of mapping the landscape, developing tools and methodological and resources, and we are developing guidelines on the recognition of micro-credentials through our work in Latin America and Caribbean. So there are things that we are offering as the UNESCO, and I would like to highlight them. The other aspect is about what should we do and what is the landscape, how we are evolving. And I would like to use a kind of an acronym, a PISA acronym. PISA stands, from my point of view, for portability of micro-credentials, interoperability, because we are speaking about different ecosystem and different platform, and accountability, because I think all stakeholders, you are mentioning them, Brendan, have to be accountable and responsible for the engagement with micro-credentials. And this stackability, as well as something that Simone was quite clear about this. So interoperability, portability, stackability, and accountability seems to me something that we need to drive as an international community, and this multi-stakeholders that you are referring to, and of course UNESCO is part of this engagement as an international level, as I mentioned earlier. Over to you.
Thank you, Borhin. Let's go to Dora. Perhaps you can give an industry perspective.
Well, I'll definitely agree. A lot of abilities there, right, Borhin, that we definitely need to develop across the board. I think the actions I would recommend is, first and foremost, you have to have a commitment to quality. And if you do, you should be pursuing recognition in some form. I think us all being committed to a path to that recognized credential that can really drive then to pathways for credit, pathways for stackability. And like I said, on-ramps and off-ramps, ways for people to really get into a topic and a pathway of learning towards a degree or after degree, as Simone emphasized, is really important. Second, I'd say partner. We didn't go at this alone. Our first micro-credential we did in collaboration with a university, and there's now more schools we're starting to develop those credentials with. So really leverage the community and ecosystem here to really partner and not do this alone. We both learned so much from both sides of it. Now I think we have the third area is really try to integrate this now. What does this really take to integrate a recognized credential in a company's learning and development programs. So these aren't just kind of standalone, sort of extracurricular type of activities. Due to really integrate it now in the university setting to drive curriculum change. And then I think what I care most about is what we're all doing here today. Come together and share, right? We all need to share the lessons we're learning. Everything continues to evolve so fast. We got to share the case studies that really create the blueprint so that many more can repeat this and can reach a much wider set of learners.
Thank you. And Simone, where are micro-credentials heading?
Oh, I feel they're the renaissance of learning, potentially. And some of the positive externalities of micro-credentials and the challenges that I think they were living are felt across the board, across policies, technologies, and practice. And particularly as a recognition technologist, I would sometimes say, I look up at the policy space and I'm seeing a very interesting motion happening, which I would call policy as data. So increasingly, there is an abundance of national and international frameworks, actually, speaking to the question earlier, that is emerging on micro-credentials specifically. Australia led the way, Europe came up with their own approach, with our own approach. I'm here in Italy. Latin America is working on their approach. Africa, the African continent, is really at work in researching micro-credentialing policies. And one of the interesting through line here is that the policies are now leaning into the technology by providing guidance around descriptors or data elements that should be used to describe micro-credentials, to make them transparent, more comparable, and therefore downstream also become that data model of the credentials. Therefore, when these credentials are set free or in motion, they can be more easily compared. So having this guidance from the policy into the technology space, I feel is really streamlining eventually the recognition process. If we can go beyond the definition of micro-credentials, which is still argued over and might be different in regions, if we drill down into the semantic layer where the meaning is, so the data elements particularly, and we have guidance from the policies, I think the technology and the open standards are ready to welcome that and implement it. And auspicably, that downstream should really streamline recognition. So I guess at the end of the day, I really feel that micro-credentials are not the story here. The story is really recognition. So if we spent the last 30 years working on learning, I think the next 30 plus will be on recognition. In a sense, shifting the narrative from lifelong learning to lifelong recognition.
Thank you. And that neatly brings us to Jessica. ABET is pioneering, helping getting recognition for micro-credentials in STEM. But I mean, is there enough of this going on across the board, across all subjects? What will it take for organizations like yourself to really push micro-credentials recognition along?
I think what it's going to take is for us to continue partnering, so finding the right partners in industry, the universities, partnering with universities in particular, so that they understand that, that in the coming year, to ensure long-term value and recognition, that there needs to be a shift from the course as a product, so as credentials as a product, to credentials as an outcome in design. So universities will increasingly design micro-credentials backwards from either learner or workforce needs. So they need to see them as pathways for non-traditional students and learners, that it's creating opportunities for people to either enter into the university setting that would have otherwise not had the opportunity or the pathway into university, but it is also at the same time addressing workforce and the emerging technology needs that we're seeing happening. So ABET will continue. We have a long history of partnering with universities and industry. We're going to continue to be able to do that, to be part of the process that they're going to embark upon to really be able to create the long-term value and recognition in the credential space, because it's essential. the space is essential. You know, it's not only essential for a lifelong learning now, but it's essential for providing the trajectory of individuals that we're going to need in very specific careers to drive this global society forward. And I think that because of that, we're all going to have to work together. I think about like professional and industry organizations as well. They're going to have to develop crosswalks. So I think we can expect frameworks that connect micro-credentials to professional licensing, continuing education requirements, apprenticeship and workforce apprenticeship models. Again, that creates those pathways for individuals to either enter into careers or start a career and go back to school maybe to continue their education. And finally, with countries, I think we've been hearing a lot about it today. I think there needs to be public policy. There needs to be support, and there needs to be public policy that policies established that really support learners, that really support the recognition and the value of credentials, so that individuals can know and rest assured that they're going to they're going to invest their time and their money and their resources into a credential that will be recognized, that will create mobility for them. And I think that all starts with the recognition at a more national level.
Thank you, Jessica. That's some really interesting insight there. So we can see how micro-credentials will not only support industry, but will break down barriers, potentially can break down, if the recognition is developed, can break down barriers between industry and universities and open up pathways to non-traditional learners. So there's quite an exciting future ahead for education to broaden its capability through micro-credentials, recognition of micro-credentials, if it's handled correctly, but there's an awful lot of work to do. So now we're going to go to the answer of our fourth poll, which is what should be high priorities for improving micro-credential recognition. And 52% said clear institutional, organizational policy and criteria, and 41% said external and or international recognition partnerships, and 55% said stronger higher education and industry employer alignment, and 43% said adoption of global quality standards. These are all the things we've just been talking about. And 43% said adoption of global quality standards, and 29% said better learner guidance and support. So that's really interesting. So now what we're going to do is, thank our speakers for the thought-provoking answers they've given, and we're going to go to our participants' questions. So they get a chance to ask you some questions. And if I just look at them, I think I'm going to start with one from Michael, saying, how do we progress on standardization across markets, the micro-credentials that different suppliers offer? At this particular refractory academy in Uganda, we are attempting to develop a platform for digital economy micro-credentials. Your guidance will be appreciated. Who would like to answer that one?
I'm happy to take the first stab at it. So I think there are two things. So the policies that are emerging, especially in Africa, there is a lot of impairment across different African countries. So aligning your micro-credentials to the policy, that is a signal for being quality assured, but also making sure that the technology platform that you decide to adopt to recognize the learning in the digital format with digital credentials is compliant with the open standards that are out there. Verifiable credentials by W3C, coming together with open badges by One EdTech. In terms of some of the data models in Europe, if you were like in Europe looking at the European learning model, which is actually now been the base of the African learning model. So we're speaking data model. So looking at technical open standards and making sure that those are complying with the policy, that would be your way to go. And I'm certainly happy to follow up offline.
Let me come in, if you don't mind, Brendan, because I think we need also to provoke a debate here. The colleague is asking from Uganda. I think the question and the challenge that we see is the challenge of policy borrowing and policy lending on micro-credentials. I think it's the same debate that we had when we were discussing national qualifications framework. What are the needs of Uganda today? What is the need of the population of Uganda, the labor market of Uganda, the tertiary education of Uganda, enterprise of Uganda? I think the question is about that. And I'm sure a colleague from Uganda will not will agree with me. 80% of the economy of Uganda is an informal economy. So how micro-credentials can respond to the challenges of the economy and the society of Uganda might be different from the economy and society of Belgium or of US. And probably the question is, can micro-credentials help people who are in informal economy have their skills recognized, have their skills validated? How they can accommodate it. And the technology with the level of digital transformation in the country that is very low. And with the digital divide that is very high. Access to data in Uganda is very expensive. So I think what I'm trying to say is that we cannot have, I would say, a response, straitjacket every response with different contexts in the same way. We need to listen to what are the needs and try to see what policies. Jessica was mentioning policies and national policy in micro-credentials. I think it has to be related to what are the expectations and the needs of our society, of our economy, of labor market, and our education system, and work with that. And I agree with Simone, probably the problem of definition is something that we need to fix, but it's not only that. Is what's the purpose for which we are setting up micro-credential strategy and policy and programs, and design it according to the situation of the country rather than designing to a situation of what is happening elsewhere. Over to you.
Dora or Jessica, would you like to answer that question? Or no? Okay. So
I'll just say that it's part of why we partnered with ABET out of the gate on this, is really looking at a global quality assurance body that has articulation agreements with bodies in a lot of other countries. And now, like I said, we have the hard work of integrating. And so now we do need to go region by region and look at changes or adaptations we might need to make to either get recognition or drop credit in that particular part of the world.
Can I just say that, I know that I stated before, ABET, we are an organization that relies very heavily on our partnerships and collaborating with individuals around the world and organizations around the world. And we were just recently at the African Engineering Education Forum. And while we were there, we entered into several letters of intent to continue to collaborate with Africa in the development of credentials and quality assurance of credentials, and also 2- and 4-year programs. So I think that, looking at ABET's frameworks and also, any potential that we have to collaborate so that there can be that third-party external validation as well, so that the learners who obtain the credentials have an increased chance of mobility is also essential.
Thank you. Okay, so now I think we'll go to a different question from Lourdes. I hope I pronounced that correctly. My question is, who should resolve the recognition gap for micro-credentials for formal educational purposes at the national and international level? It seems it requires policy will from public authorities and regulators.
Let me come in on this, Brendan, if you don't mind, first, because I tried to respond in the chat, but I would like to take it further, but also relate to the previous discussion. When we look at the data on enrollment in higher education, for example, we see that the gross enrollment rate is uneven across regions in higher education. 9% in Africa, 42% as global average, and around 80% in OECD economies. So the question of access is something that we need to solve, and obviously the micro-credentials can be part of that response to the need for access to learning opportunities and recognition opportunities and to tertiary education. Now, the global and the regional conventions I was mentioning are part of the solution to better understanding and defining micro-credentials. We have, as I said, 100 countries that adhere to the principles of recognition of partial and validation and partial studies and validation of prior learning. for fair and transparent recognition of skills and qualification, including refugees and displaced persons. So we have a critical mass of countries, and we have more than 100 countries who have established the national qualification framework at different levels of implementation, but we have a critical mass of countries that can advance and fill this gap and contribute to resolving the problem. But also the network of information centers, they're also part of that infrastructure. Again, we have more than 100 information centers that are engaged in fair, transparent, and better recognition of skills and qualifications. So the more we are coming together, having common principles, common understanding, the more we are able to ensure for a large number of people better recognition of their skills and qualification and better recognition of micro-credentials. I'm taking it from a global perspective because I think it's also part of the solution that we can offer through the conventions and the recognition mechanisms that have been adopted by countries as well. Over.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer that question? If not, we'll move on to the next one, which is, I think, we'll ask a question from Cameron, which is, what do the panel think of trusted community partners and stakeholders endorsing digital badges for informal learning or industry insight or work experience activities, particularly around enabling social mobility? Perhaps, Jessica, perhaps you'd like to jump in on that one.
Yeah, so I think that we all have a role to play in the quality assurance and also in the acceptability of credentials as a viable form of learning. And so to the extent that it's a trusted partner or individual who is providing an endorsement, I think the more the better. So that we can solidify credentials' place in a learner's journey. But then again, I just think there has to be some due diligence that is done and who is providing the endorsements or the recognition thereof, just to make sure that we maintain a handle on that ecosystem as well.
Dora, would you like to comment on this question?
Actually a topic internally for us as a company, like how do we recognize all the different stages and building out a whole badging taxonomy. I think Simone touched on this earlier. We do think it's really important to have some wide recognition that creates that initial pathway that is just about an initial activity or an initial small piece of learning that takes them in on a pathway where their interest may lie, that is deeper dives and maybe technical expertise for certificates or certification there, and then can take them to pathways to full micro-credentials, and then may take them to a pathway to a degree, or if they already have that degree, maybe not. So I think this is really where pathways come into place, but we do need the trusted assurance. So if they're trusted community partners, I think they're creating that very early on-ramp for us. So I'm all for it.
If I may just comment quickly on this one, it is, we might look at endorsements as a form of nano credentials. They do add that signal to badges or recognitions. And so I think they will play increasingly a part in how we build trust, because that's how we build trust amongst humans, endorsements. Trust that is, sort of flows around. And then the other comment that I wanted to add here is that we mostly talk about formal recognition of formal learning here, but the spectrum of recognition is much wider. It goes from conformance, which is formal recognition of formal learning, where we spend most of our times, to the very opposite, which I would say is the empowerment quadrant, which is the informal recognition of informal learning. Now, that's a much more complex space, but that is, I would argue, where most of our learning really happens, but it's invisible, it's not recognized. And for specific use cases or categories, that is the real challenge of recognition. How might we make the invisible manifest?
If I can come, Brendan, because I think Simone is right in pointing to the diversity of the learning settings, the learning pathways, and connecting those learning settings. But I think there is an elephant in the room that Dora referred to it in the beginning, but we didn't. We don't know how AI will disrupt all the labor market, demand for skills, learning and learning pathways, but also the way we recognize skills and qualifications. I think that's something that we obviously started looking at it. There are different debates, different concerns, some of them about the potential, but also about the risks and ethical challenges. But I think we need a serious discussion around that as well. AI is impacting labor market, economies, societies, but also the education system, including the way we assess, we certify, and we recognize qualifications, including micro-credentials, but not only. In reality, it can disrupt the whole qualification system and quality assurance. We speak about quality assurance, and I think Simone uses the term as a kind of static quality assurance or static. It's true that that's a static approach, but probably the more disrupted approach will be coming with the AI, and we will need to take that into consideration. And I think that's the work and that's the webinar for the university world and used to organize and to debate about. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great idea for another webinar. I think we've got time for two quick questions. I think one's directly related to ABET, so I'll put this to Jessica, which is a question from Alan about how does ABET relate to professional bodies in accrediting micro-credentials in specifically related labor markets, such as engineering and health?
So in regulated fields like engineering, ABET's role is complementary to the statutory regulators. So, for example, using the recognition of credentials. So ABET's recognition of credential service in no shape or form will replace licensure requirements, but it will instead provide professional bodies may use the recognition of micro-credentials as a continuing professional development evidence, competency strengthening for specific practice areas. Maybe it's supplemental skills for emerging fields such as AI, sustainability, cybersecurity, etc. So we're more of a complementary to the role that the regulated fields like engineering. Now, I believe you also mentioned in the question healthcare. So in health and education sectors, ABET plays an adjacent role, but not like a regulatory role. And I don't see that changing for recognition of credentials. I think that health-related engineering or technology fields, they are aligned with ABET's scope, and that they can integrate and use the recognition of credential services as well to be able to, it's a quality benchmark for digital skills or technical competencies they may have, or a trusted way to validate micro-credential rigor, especially in cross-disciplinary areas within STEM. So AI and health, data analytics, health devices and how they integrate with the different disciplines. So I see us being both adjacent as well as complementary in both of those areas, especially now more so through our recognition of credential service.
Thank you. And we just have time for one last quick question, which is Vindia asks, what will be the artifacts of learning other than a certificate of completion in order to ensure liquidity with micro-credentials?
So I can address that really quickly, and I'll let my other esteemed panelists share their insights. But I think from an ABET standpoint, we will require a check for understanding, a validation that there was a skill set transfer, that those knowledge and skills and abilities were transferred to the earner of that credential. And I think that creates, in and of itself, a huge opportunity for validation and mobility. So it's not just a participatory, it's not, you didn't go and sit in a room and talk and share ideas and then walk away. There was actually a skill and knowledge transfer that was occurring within that credential when it is an ABET recognized credential.
Thank you. And Simone, would you like to give a quick answer to that?
Not specifically, but I would definitely like to recognize Boran for giving us another Tower of Pisa, layering and stacking up portability, interoperability, stackability, and accountability, and remind all of us that although the Tower of Pisa is a leaning tower, is one of the wonders of this world.
Thank you. And now I'm sorry, we're actually going to have to draw it to a conclusion. But what an interesting and informative class on trends around micro-credentials and their recognition, and we can see just how much more work there is to do to make this work for industry and higher education. Unfortunately, we now must end our discussion, but I'd really like to thank all our participants and especially our speakers for attending this webinar, and our panelists for giving their rich and varied thoughts. It's been a really interesting discussion. So thank you to Borheen, Dora, Simone and Jessica, and thanks to ABET, especially for partnering with us in this webinar, supporting us. We really appreciate that. And as mentioned, this is this is the fourth in a series of UWN ABET webinars, which are combining high-level thinking with hands-on advice that will help people to navigate their work in a time of change and uncertainty. And I think we can all agree that's the kind of period we're in at the moment. And a recording of this webinar will be available. University World News will send a link to this recording out by email to all people who registered for the webinar. The recording will also be available on our YouTube channel. Just search for University World News on YouTube. And do read University World News. And if you like it, do tell your colleagues about it. We're always interested to have more people know about us and get to enjoy the articles that we provide. So thank you, everybody, for being a wonderful bunch of speakers and a great audience.
Thank you.
The end. Good night.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.